People who are in partner businesses may be using content from one another. A map, for example, to get to the delivery location that you need to put a package. Instead of using a map and seeing these abstract lines, and know how to use maps, many of us do, we would use augmented reality and simply see the arrows, the navigational signs to move forward. In fact, content is so diverse, and I can't begin to put on one screen for you all the companies that would be in this segment. There are thousands, multiples of thousands, perhaps even tens of thousands of businesses that have already begun to AR-enable part of their digital assets. That's not very common because it is quite difficult and it may be costly. But let me give you some clues as to some of those companies that have already begun. These are just a few of the thousands. Many companies in automotive have already begun to use augmented reality to communicate with consumers about their products. The company here, that's a Nokia company, is using augmented reality to help people see the points of interest that are in the databases of their maps. They're geospatially referenced points of interest where people will go and need to see those in the context of the real world. In the home, there are companies that have augmented reality assisted catalogs for your garments. Maybe you want to see what the paints will look like in your room before you apply the paint, or maybe you would like to see the furniture before you purchase it. How will it look in your room using an IKEA catalog? There's also some other tools for the home that are very, very simple, easy to use. Anybody who conducts events, who organizes events, could have augmented reality applications to help their attendees find the event and to have a good experience. Maybe they need to find the services, the food, the nearest exit. Also, museums and cultural heritage venues do many of the same things. They use augmented reality features in their mobile applications to help the visitors have a better experience. Employees and partners, I've already spoken about how they could use augmented reality. I just provide to you a very few industries: automotive, aviation, construction engineering, manufacturing, power and energy, oil and gas. All these companies are currently they have their assets in digital format, and they just need to enhance them, and they're beginning to do that. So, as I said, more and more companies are doing it, and they're integrating more commonly. AR viewing is becoming a feature instead of it being a standalone service. There also has been, from as long ago as 3 or 4 years, a trend among the brands and merchants to use AR, and they are accelerating that, but getting more savvy, more intelligent about how they do it so that it has a more utilitarian role in the lives of their customers or prospects. And they're tending to use more and more augmented reality skills and tools in-house, meaning to date they've largely used the services of their creative professional partners, their advertising agencies that are outside the house, outside of their companies. And this is becoming more like web services and web communications tools. They're bringing them internally. Enterprises are just beginning to experiment with augmented reality, and they are integrating them into their workflow and into their communications with customers and employees. Now let's look at the second segment. This is the only one of the 5 segments that's really new just for augmented reality. All of the others, we can say, existed without this special method of viewing the content. There were already devices, tablets, computers, smartphones. There already were chips and networks and content and people working and making their livelihood in all these segments. But augmented reality is really brought to life because you can package the content in a different way. Companies in this segment were the focus of a webinar I did back in April, and I invite you to go to watch that. It's called AR in 2014 or AR Today, depending on where you look. There are thousands of qualified augmented reality experience designers. They usually have a variety of skills, including experience design, instructional design, graphics, information management, programming, and most likely they're not able to make their living entirely or exclusively on augmented reality. And there are many, many software development kits that are for use by those developers. I've included just a few of those here, but you can learn more about them on the web or by watching a past webinar. So let's talk about the trends. This is what's been happening, is that there's been this segmentation, this kind of force between those who publish the tools and those who use the tools. Well, the tool providers couldn't really make a business without people who were using the tools. And then the experienced developers were not always satisfied with the tools they were given. They couldn't always wait for the next feature to come out. So they became tools providers themselves. And this dynamic between those who use the tools and those who publish the tools is still going on. It's quite a delicate dynamic. You don't want to compete with your customers. But as time goes on, the barrier to entry for providing new tools or for becoming an experienced developer is dropping because the tools get easier and easier and simpler. And over time, another thing's happening, which is that the number of experienced developers has gotten much larger, and the tool providers have gotten more tightly intertwined with the enabling technology providers. So they are becoming more embedded, and I think we're going to see some rapid change in this segment. The discovery and delivery segment are what I sometimes call the core communications tools. By this I mean the networks to transmit both the sensor readings or the context files, or the content, the digital content that needs to be sent back to present to the user. There's also a feature here called discovery, meaning how will I know if it has an augmented reality experience associated with it? Well, that's the topic of many, many more webinars, and I look forward to providing those. But for now, let's just say that this communications about where AR can be initiated and how to detect it is another thing we can include in the core communications segment. The network operators, yes, they have dabbled in this in the past, but to be quite frank with you, no one has really embraced this segment. People are holding back. There are the network operators who'd like to get involved and provide some specialized services, but there are also the hosting services, the hosting of content, such as the Amazon Cloud. IBM's Internet of Things initiative has some great places. The Metaio Cloud Services is very specialized just for augmented reality content. We're going to see this changing. If and when the network operators and cloud providers come in, they're going to be able to differentiate themselves from one another by providing more context in the region. So if you're in Asia or if you're in Europe or North America, the sensors readings will make more sense. They'll also be able to add to their service portfolio some personal data storage or security features, and they might partner with content to cache content more close to where the users will be needing it. Those who provide application stores are eventually going to be improving their services to include experience catalogs. Now let's talk about the devices. This is where the context is acquired, where it's being picked up by all the sensors or by the settings and preferences within the device. It's also exactly where those experiences, the augmented reality experience, is delivered and presented to the user. So you should go back to the first webinar we did in March and learn more about how the context is acquired and the presentation is made. What's clear about this segment is no one is going to really propose, and no one will be successful in proposing an AR-only device. AR is a visualization technique. You want to be able to do many other things. You want to be able to snack on information that might not be in context with the real world. You might want to be able to search with things that are from another time. Maybe you want to look at the news feed. not relevant to exactly where you're standing. So to be perfectly valuable, there have to be many features in a device. But we can certainly look at the companies that have to date been providing us with mobile platforms for computation, analysis, for including all these sensors. And then there's another group of companies that are working on personal displays. Of course, Google is also providing a personal display. Field of view is in a different place than where the Google Glass display is. But we can certainly argue about that. There are personal displays also that are going to be flexible, not necessarily worn on the head. They could be flexible and transparent, and many, many different types of other displays, such as projection displays. It sounds, and it's true, there's a lot of hardware in the device, and this is very much the center of this segment. In addition to the sensors and the displays, we also have the ability to capture motion and the position of the user. Also in this segment are those who provide mobile operating systems, and they do so increasingly in close relationship with AR enablers. And there'll be more and more radio interfaces and human interfaces. In fact, one of the big trends in devices is this fragmentation of devices. So we're finding that more and more the components that we thought were tightly interconnected are separating, and you'll be able to configure your own personalized device in the future, some of which will have more features for depth sensing. Some of them will be more for auditory sensing. Who knows? Very, very customizable. Now let's look at the enablers segment. In this last segment of the ecosystem, horizontal bar here is because the foundation of the augmented reality ecosystem. Some of the, and as I've mentioned before, are computation, the graphics, or computing what an interface request means. What is that speech saying? Translating that into a command for the system to understand. There are also the operating systems and their application frameworks. There's personal data storage local to the device, so securities local and remote from the device, and a variety of enablers that are around the communications, radio, APIs. Some of the companies in this segment include, of course, virtually all the companies that are doing mobile processors. Many companies, not all. There are a lot of sensors that are not suitable for mobile augmented reality, but those that I've mentioned here on the screen are the popular ones where they're making a significant amount or all of their revenue on mobile sensors. There's also the mobile operating systems and application frameworks provided by companies such as Apple, Google, Samsung, and the Eclipse Foundation. More and more what's happening in this segment is a better sensitivity and accuracy. This also means more data, so that means we need to compute more. There's more specialization of the hardware and more integration with the mobile operating system. And in order to be able to integrate more easily with the applications at the highest level, the mobile operating system in the middle, there's more and more standards surrounding this hardware. That concludes my overview of the AR ecosystem and its segments. Now I'll be going through using that framework and talking to you about a couple of other subjects. I promised I'd bring up the subject of investments that have been made to date and that will continue to be needed in order for augmented reality to expand. For at least a decade, maybe some will argue longer, there has been a great deal invested in research and development. And sometimes it's also about acquiring intellectual property or companies that have a lot of talent in augmented reality. So you have to have the enablers, the products and services. So this is what I call the supply side of the equation. So the left-hand side of this figure is where we have those technologies that you have to develop and productize and prepare for the customer. Then there's the demand side. This is the education and the sales process. And over the last few years especially, we've seen much more investment to increase the customer awareness and their ability to communicate about augmented reality. And when you have this dual investment on the R&D and the products and services and the awareness, then what you see beginning to develop today is a vibrant ecosystem, a channel for selling and integrating augmented reality into other services. So let's talk more about the left-hand side. Developing the solutions requires a tremendous amount of research, and we've been seeing investment increasing on the user experience side. More and more people are working at to try to find the very intuitive ways of communicating to a user, to simplify things, to also make the context more accurate, because if you're standing on one side of the road and your sensors think that you're on the other side of the road, well, you might end up flat in the middle of the road, run over by a car. We certainly wouldn't want that, and nobody wants that responsibility. So we all know that to have good performance augmented reality, we need better accuracy in our sensors. We need better registration with the real world, so that you're not registering perhaps with a reflection, or registering the user with a shadow. We need also to control the use of power, because the batteries are not lasting long enough for people to use this in a very good way. We need to have those research results go to more products, and sometimes they will be developed, they will be integrated into standards. And sometimes companies are not able to really build themselves everything they'll need. What they want to do is to acquire a company. So they have to make this analysis of deciding whether they want to complement or complete their offerings with those of other companies. I mentioned that there's been a lot of work to develop the customer interest, but we need to know what people really want. It's not always clear that what Tom Cruise used in the Minority Report is exactly what everyone will need. In fact, I very much doubt that. But we do need to give people ideas and to suggest ways and find out how they would use these different new interfaces. We also have many pilots and test beds that are being conducted this time, where they're introducing emerging technologies and then allowing, in some cases, the public to even experience it themselves. Now, who's been the most? To be quite clear, there was an understanding very early that computing and would be necessary, would be integrated in manufacturing, in service industries, in transportation, and many other ways in which augmented reality could bring digital information right into the physical world. There also has been a tremendous investment by the providers of hardware, because they know that if there is a demand for augmented reality, they need to be up there in the front row in order for their technologies to be the most popular. So there's been a lot of investment, acquisitions, and patents developed in this area. Then in the third area that I highlight on this screen, the experience designers are doing a lot of work. I would say that they're investing in kind, their time, to experiment and to play and explore with how to interact between the digital and the physical world, and to simplify these experiences for the user. The IEEE, Standards Association, and the IEEE as a whole have also been investing in the development of augmented reality. For the last 10 or 12 years, there's been the International Symposium of Mixed and Augmented Reality. If you're not familiar with that, I recommend that you do go and learn more about it. It's where the research community publishes its latest results. The IEEE also has a few pages in what it calls its innovation space. There are these series of webinars and our Google Hangouts. There are demonstrations of augmented reality that are being produced by the IEEE at future events. There's a new program called Industry Connections for Augmented Reality, and a variety of other cross-disciplinary collaborations, such as those with security, safety, power and energy, and learning industries. So that's where investment is happening. Now let's look at how can you turn that investment. What are the things that we can measure about augmented reality? And we need to perhaps identify engagement and try to measure that and interaction, the speed by which someone learns something. How can we use our existing tools and metrics to measure the new value that's brought around by augmented reality? One of the things I want to warn you about, though, is that on the side of the consumers, they're very sensitive, of course, to price. So the lower the price, the more likely the consumer will adopt. And in the enterprise, there are concerns that enterprises are not adopting augmented reality because they want to wait and see. They're slow to change, they're risk averse, and may miss the boat entirely. So with those risks aside, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through each of the segments and talk about how the value proposition, the new value that's brought about by introducing augmented reality or integrating it, and then on the bottom left, some of the ways that we will monetize that. For brands and merchants, they want to create greater awareness of their products. They want to increase sales. That's a pretty clear way to measure your impact or the impact that augmented reality is having. Do I sell more devices? Do I sell more garments, more furniture? Do people come back because they found the furniture easier to assemble? Have a better experience with my brand. For enterprises, it's primarily about reducing cost, time, and risk around errors, around people making errors because they didn't have the right information at the right time, perhaps because they didn't have the opportunity to go and find that information somewhere else. And it really translates into this metric of human productivity. How can we help the automate the systems that we can, and where the human needs to be involved in making a decision to make them more knowledgeable and wise. And then there are, in this content group, also those I call the traditional publishers, and they might want to make augmented reality, they might want to use that to make their content easier to access, easier to find or to consume, and they can just differentiate themselves. They might sell that augmented reality experience on a per-use or per-view basis. They might have a subscription relationship, or they might sell advertising, just like we see today on the internet. Those who are in the packaging segment, of course, there are those who are doing the development. That's what I call the experience designers. They do bespoke applications, and so they'll certainly do the work for hire. They might also, those experience designers, might also do a revenue-sharing partnerships with their content partners. Or the publishers of the software tools can also sell licenses. They might sell them on a monthly basis, annual basis. And those who are in the experience packaging segment who want to introduce new content on the app stores can also sell their value proposition on a per-use, per-view, download basis, subscription, or introduce advertising, just like the content providers. Those who are providing networks or core communication services will probably want to measure their value on the basis of some kind of performance, such as the response time to get an augmented reality experience, to have lower error rates or higher frequency matches that are accurate. They want to have strong registration and tracking with the real world, and they can do that probably by locating some of the algorithms and some of the computational resources close to the edge where the users are most likely to need them. Those who use networks and who are using augmented reality delivery services will probably pay a premium if their services are easier to use. There's also probably some value to be brought and some money that could be charged for protecting the user's privacy, and on the reverse, to gather analytics and provide those to the content providers. So there can also be security and privacy services. All of these can be delivered on a contractual basis as long as you can provide clear quality and quantity metrics. Now let's look at the business models for the device providers. If they can different types of wearable displays, head-mounted displays, or if you want to attach to more kinds of sensors or to your smart watch, those device manufacturers are going to make their revenues, they're going to turn that investment into revenue by charging a premium on a per unit basis, or they can license the rights to their intellectual property. The same for the AR technology enablers. They use the same business models and the same methods to go to market. The same kinds of benefits apply to them, and the same business models of a price per unit premium or a license to intellectual properties. Now let's look at the business strategy. I have 2 rules of thumb for business success with augmented reality. The first is never forget what the definition of augmented reality is. AR only exists when the physical world and the digital assets are together. The purple arrow is a photograph of the physical world, the buildings there in New York City, and the digital assets are the overlay that appear on the screen. So they really have to be tightly integrated. And then you can only really contribute to business success when the combination is repeatedly adding value. This is one of my concerns with many of the experiences people have had so far with augmented reality, is that they're just kind of, so what? You do it once, you never need to go back again, because you have a pretty good idea of what that's all about, and it doesn't really add value. But if you can find value and then repeat it, become part of a user's daily life, that's the trick. That's the real value. The greatest value is also when there's a multi-step process. Maybe I gave this very simple example of you need to examine the data and visualize that data, some portion of that data, either in a very complex workflow or a strategy, or maybe to entertain the user or to educate them on something. So it usually has, there's a clue when you have to talk to somebody about a multi-step process. There's probably a role for augmented reality in the visualization of the data. For content providers and publishers, we need to be thinking success for them. What that might mean is to use AR as part of your complete communications package and strategies. Don't isolate augmented reality. Include it. For enterprises, as I mentioned before, where you can automate, of course, you don't need augmented reality for a robot. What you need augmented reality for is when there's a human being who could introduce an error or who is introducing a delay because they don't know what they can do or what they need to do next. In enterprises, one of the keys to successful strategy is to introduce the AR in phases and to be very, very attentive to the user needs so that you can respond and evolve with those. In addition, for the third category of content publisher, what I call the traditional content publishers, those could be news outlets, information of all kinds, motion picture, game publishers. What they need to do is look for places where there's an experience that you can't do without augmented reality. Find that point. It may take some work, it may take a lot of time and interaction with customers, but that's what you need to find in order to be able to bring that strategic benefit. And I think we're going to need to look at ways of charging for smaller units of information. That could involve micropayments, some kind of a relationship or a subscription basis, or some kind of relationship with a bank. In the experience packaging segment, a good business strategy is to exceed your goals. It's always a good strategy to exceed the goals of your clients, but you also need to do that sometimes by providing less. A more simple, intuitive interaction design may better meet the goals than a complicated one. You also want to look for places where something can't be achieved without augmented reality. And I have brought up some of those examples in past webinars, and we'll certainly look at them again in the future. It's very, very important for your business success to simplify and to look for innovation. If you can reuse something, do so. Don't reinvent the wheel. Reduce the cost by using a modular architecture, where possible using standards and open source projects to keep your costs as low as possible. Companies that are in the discovery and delivery segment will also have some other business strategy if and when they decide to enter. I think they'll make very good partners for the content publishers and the device manufacturers. These companies should partner to increase privacy, especially concerning personal data. And one of the principles that we think network operators and other people who are surrounding the augmented reality technologies need to do is they need to practice these principles of privacy by design. Think of it in advance. Don't wait for there to be breaches in privacy, breaches in security before implementing those. So everything you can do to reduce the risk of thieves or cyber spies preying on your customers will probably bring you much value, as it will to your customers. The builders and those who sell devices, who add value-added services on top of hardware in these devices, will find their investments well served if they can integrate with much higher quality components than they have been to date. Because many of the components when they are of low quality, you'll have a poor registration. You'll have an inaccurate assessment of where that user is. Or if a poor quality camera is pointing at a target in dim light, there will be no recognition. I find that quite common these days. Who are speaking most often with the end customer, they need to promote and educate the customers about the augmented reality services that they offer and the device capabilities that differentiate them. Connect to more sensors and a higher accuracy. Those both can be done with higher quality sensors and partnerships with software providers that can do good sensor fusion algorithms and cleaning the data, if you will. That's one of the very important things that have to be done at the device level. Finally, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about AR enabling technology providers and the business strategies for this segment. They need to implement as many standards as they can because there's so many components that go into augmented reality that if they don't observe and implement the standards, they'll find themselves very isolated and not very useful to augmented reality users or developers. So implement standards as much as possible, especially in the domains of media capture and analysis. That's using intelligent algorithms, for example, to analyze the video, such as the simultaneous location and mapping, what we call SLAM, is one of the technologies that's very, very popular. There are other tools and technologies and standards that you need to use to determine and to know the user's position. These might be standards from the Open Geospatial Consortium. You may have heard of the OGC, which publishes a variety of standards to better track and to better translate the position of the user into some usable information. With multiple sensors and clean up the data and make better and more. So fee basis, rather, not cost basis, a cost plus benefit basis. So I'm reaching the end of the hour, and before I take some questions, I'd just like to wrap up and tell you about the some of the take-home messages from today's session. AR provides value as an integrated whole. There's a whole ecosystem of companies that are involved in this business, and they have different trends depending on the ecosystem segment that we're looking at. There are very few firm metrics, or ways to measure the health of an ecosystem. And there's also some new business models, but a lot of existing business models. We shouldn't forget. We should really not abandon the things that are proven. There have been many investments by the European Commission, by companies and governments And to date, those have exceeded the revenues generated from augmented reality, but that is going to change. Somewhere down the line, many people are going to begin to measure and to predict the return on investment on a segment-by-segment basis. And I think when they are able to do that, we're going to see the absolute widespread adoption of augmented reality. This is very important to our success. I'd like to invite you to stay tuned and to continue to return, if you will, to the AR in Your Future series. These are some episodes that we have planned for you in the fall. We will be talking about open and interoperable augmented reality, a topic that if you look on the internet, you'll find quite a lot of content. I've partnered with others to prepare. We'll be talking about the use of augmented reality in some vertical markets, such as manufacturing or oil and gas or automotive. We'll also be looking at some of the scenarios for the future of augmented reality. I've been working on those scenarios with the assistance of the IEEE, and I look forward to sharing those with you this fall. So I'd be happy to now turn our attention to some questions if we have some. And David, what kinds of questions do we have today from the audience?
Thanks, Christine, for another great presentation. We have about 10 minutes perspective. Gentleman comments that you delivered a great high-level AR presentation, but one of the markets missing was AR and gaming, more specifically Oculus Rift, or now even Facebook, who have developed AR-enabled hardware. Do you have any comments on the gaming industry and that market segment and how it relates to augmented reality?
Sure. I'd be happy to, but I first want to clarify that the hardware and the displays such as the Oculus Rift and those of others are part of the devices segment. So those are included in that segment. I couldn't be exhaustive in all of the companies that I could speak about today, but so do please forgive me for not mentioning Facebook, but there are many, many uses for augmented reality in rich entertainment applications, including games. However, I would say that so far they are limited to people sitting in one place. So a lot of the games that I've seen with augmented reality are very, how should I say, limited in their scope and their vision. One exception to that, if I might introduce it here, is this new game called Watchdog. You can perhaps go and look at that. It's really got a big, released about 3 weeks ago to much fanfare. But there are so many excellent ways that people could use augmented reality to do, for example, treasure hunts in the physical world. They could use game pieces to teach a child in a playful manner how to read or how to count and do other specialized tasks. So we can add a gaming perspective into many of the applications, regardless of whether they are to engage a consumer with a product. A brand might want to play a game with a cereal box, or might want to introduce augmented reality into their logo in some manner. So I don't concentrate as a consultant on those verticals such as entertainment and gaming, but I do know they're very important, and I think that they are included as part of the content segment of the ecosystem. So part of the question was around devices and hardware, so I think that those were very well represented in the devices segment. And then part of the question about vertical markets is entertainment and gaming. Those are what I call the traditional content markets. They publish digital content for use by businesses or consumers, and in some cases in a playful and entertaining way.
Thanks, Christine. We'll go here and jump right into question number 2. I believe this is looking like it's coming from a business owner for some new revenue stream going to suffer. So a two-parter there for you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, David. Great question. Again, thank you. I think the trick here is to think about augmented reality in a way similar to the way people approach the web. That's not to say the internet. The web technologies that were introduced helped us to present and to deliver information to people, to human beings, when and where they need it. And augmented reality does exactly that. So if you think that you are in the business of providing information to your customers, to your employees, to your partners, or to anyone else, then augmented reality is going to need to be part of your communication strategy. That's not to say you have to do it immediately. You may not be using augmented reality to generate revenues, such as the companies that I mentioned in this presentation. Many companies are going to use augmented reality to save money, to lower the cost of doing business by reducing the time that it takes to present information in a meaningful way to the user. Then I think that the part of the question that treats, where is this all going? I'm sorry, David, could you repeat the second part of that question? I kind of lost the thought there.
Sure, no problem. I think the gentleman's just interested that if his company does not utilize this new technology either now or in the very near future to generate a new revenue stream, is his business going to suffer? You started to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that it's really going to be a matter of just a matter of time. There are, of course, many costs. The longer you wait, the lower some of these costs will be. If you get in early, their costs of development might be higher because there are fewer people who have been before you, but then gain a competitive advantage if you use the technologies well in your company.
Okay,
Leaders in terms of the use of augmented reality. There are the brands and merchants as a group, and that's, of course, a very, very broad group. Companies that sell things to consumers and want their brand associated with innovation, with something very modern, and they want to keep the customer coming back. So the brands and merchants have done a fabulous job of using augmented reality, and they're going to continue to expand the use of AR in their businesses. The second, very, very important, and I think it predates the brand and merchant use, is the automotive industry. Automotive has been exploring the use of augmented reality for over 10 years. And we've seen over the last 3 years a real maturation in the automobile industry. They use augmented reality during most phases of their industry product life cycle. So you'll have augmented reality is used in the design phases, product design, the dashboard design. They also use augmented reality in designing the manufacturing workflow to make sure that the different steps go in sequence and that there's not something that's preventing the person on the factory floor from working properly. There are many uses internally to the business. In addition, they're using augmented reality to engage customers, to choose a car with a different kind of hubcap or a different color. They use augmented reality in the service of your automobile to train service people on how to repair new engines and car parts. They use it to help the user, the individual driver, be safer, learn about their new product, their new automobile, of course. So it's incredibly effective, and it's really penetrating many different segments of the automobile industry.